Hello, and welcome to another episode of Podcast Pasta. That's a podcast that's like pasta, not the podcast that's about pasta. As always, I'm your host, Mike, and today I want to do a bit of a retrospective slash critique of, at the time of this recording, I think the largest, or at the very least, like one of the largest food-based channels on YouTube, and that is Binging with Babish. I've said in the past that I kind of have a weakness for what I call like food tube content in the sense that, I give a lot of leeway to that style of content, that type of content, where I don't think I would with, other genres or whatever. But I think you could also learn a lot from like kind of like at the very least like kind of studying it, not only because of its like popularity, but how much like deference I think YouTube gives to that type of content. And there's nobody that like kind of exemplifies that more to some degree than Binging with Babish. Now, I don't know how necessary it will be to give like a primer to this topic, because if you're listening to me, especially if you're listening to me on YouTube, you're probably subscribed to like Binging with Babish. You're more likely, at the very least, subscribed to him than you are to me. But for the sake of like completeness, I'll give like a brief rundown of like the history of the channel. So Binging with Babish, I can't remember what year it specifically started, but it started with like a very simple premise, and it's one of those ideas that's like so simple in concept that like when you think back on it, you're like, oh man, why didn't I come up with that? But its core like I guess I would say concept is that to basically recreate iconic food from film and television, right? Again, very basic premise that it just kind of makes sense, right? Why it would draw like an audience to it. It also helped that the show did have like strong production, even for like a new channel at the time. And I think part of that is that Andrew, the main host of the channel, had a background in like, or has a background in like film, right? I think he went to college for that, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong on that, but at least from my recollection, his background isn't necessarily in cooking. It's more so in like, like film production or whatever. So no, so having that like very strong premise combined with like pretty decent like production value, kind of skyrocketed the channel like immediately into like popularity, right? And I was part of that beginning crowd too. I think I subscribed during like the second or third video. I can't remember exactly, and I've been kind of following them at least now on and off since, since the beginning. But no, obviously, so for a while that was kind of like the core structure would be Andrew coming on the camera to recreate like food from film and television, and then as like he was able to get more of a footing on YouTube, it would be more like I guess I would say like topical like foods, like, oh, if it's a new show that came out with like a new dish that everyone's like curious like to see made, you'd see him like right on the forefront like making it. And he still, as I'll get later, he still kind of does that, although like the structure of the channel has changed. But for a while it was just basically the Binging with Babish show. Now again, I was a fan of the show for like its onset, but and I've talked about this with I think it was a discussion that I had with a longtime friend of the channel, Dennis, that while I was a fan of Binging with Babish, one like kind of concern that I saw early on was that with very specific niches on like YouTube, right? You kind of with how regularly you have to create content for the platform, eventually like certain niche ideas run out of steam. And I think Binging with Babish was like honestly no exception to that, because even with the vast like field of like film and television, there's only like so many like dishes you can recreate before you start like repeating yourself over and over again. And eventually I think you kind of hit I think Andrew kind of hit that problem because after a while there had to be kind of this rebranding where it's no longer just binging with Babish. They changed like the name of the channel to like the Babish Culinary Universe, right? And with that came like them test piloting a bunch of different shows, and it makes sense, right? Like on YouTube, if your channel gets like big enough, you don't if you get like big enough, you can't really have your channel just like fizzle out. The example I like to give is like Fred, like one of the very early like big YouTube personalities, right? Eventually, the main person who created the Fred character retired, but the channel had like millions of subscribers at the time. So I think I can't remember if it was like if it was always owned by like a large production company or like once he retired it was like sold off, but they sold it off and they tried to do like this whole like kids interviewing people on the street show thing that didn't really pan out. Eventually the show died, but the point is like, yeah, channel gets large enough, which Binging with Babish did, and they had to like try and venture out to like keep the revenue up to keep the channel like alive outside of like the Binging with Babish main show, which is what they kind of did. They tried to experiment with trying to just remember off the top of my head like some of the shows that they tried going forward. There was like Soy Boys, where it was like one of the people in the production was like going on a diet, like a soy-based diet, and they were like showing what foods that they were making for that diet. You have like Basics with Babish, where it's like kind of more tutorial, like how to do certain like cooking related things. They brought on like guests from different like larger like food based channels, like America's Test Kitchen. I think they brought on somebody from that, and through all this testing or whatever, you eventually get to the current iteration of like the Babish Culinary Universe, which is so you still do have occasional Binging with Babish episodes. Usually it's in relation to either a sponsorship or like a related to like a current show. For example, recently Andrew did like recreating like the egg bar from Severance. And it kind of makes sense, like if you have somebody on Google wanting to type in like, oh, egg bar Severance recreation, his video will probably be one of the top ones. So it's like, one of the top ones to show up. So it's like feeding into like the SEO or whatever. So you still do occasionally have Binging with Babish, but and you still do occasionally have like Basics with Babish. But he's also expanded out into I think I think it's called like Best of Babish, where it's like they take a whole bunch of food from like a certain category, like, oh, we're gonna try all the different chicken tenders in like a store and like rate it from like 1 to 10 or something like that. Like better, and then there's like another show, I can't remember the name of it, where it's like he tries to not only recreate a dish from like a large restaurant, but also try and outdo those restaurants and like kind of judge show or whatever. Alongside that, they also brought on a new guest, Alvin, and with Alvin, he has his own offshoots of shows. Anime with Alvin, which is like Binging with Babish, but with animated shows, and him as the host. Arcade with Alvin, same thing with video games, and then in kind of weirdly stretching the concept a bit, Anything with Alvin, which is just him recreating anything from like viral videos, right? And that's mainly the core structure of the channel right now. There's some side shows that they occasionally post up every now and then, but for the most part, I think those are like the main channels with Andrew and like Alvin, right? And I guess I'll preface this next part by saying that I still, again, sucker for FoodTube content, and I do think that there's at least partially a reason why he is on top. I think that there is like at the very least very strong production to behind the channel, and some of the concepts are still fun. Like Binging with Babish again is still a fun core idea, and so I do at least from what I'm able to see every now and then of like the Babish Culinary Universe, I do still very much enjoy it. But I might not be the best guest on or the best person to consult with that because again, I kind of do have this bias in favor of like food-based YouTube content. But that's not to say that I don't have like my critiques of the channel and like some of its content. And some of it is like, I mean, I guess I'll start with like kind of the easier stuff like that the whole community has addressed that I'm not sure how much I want to like fixate on myself because again, like the community has rightfully like critiqued them for these points, but again, for the sake of completeness, I guess I should give my own 2 cents on these topics. The big one has been they've had a few issues here and there with sponsorships in the past. So the big one that like everyone in the Babish community is probably aware of is their constant partnership with BetterHelp, right? So for those of you who don't know, BetterHelp, like I think it's like a therapy app where you get connected with like therapists online, and they were embroiled in a controversy, and maybe they still are. I haven't really been keeping up with it, where they were selling customer data to large data brokerage firms, and it was obviously kind of fringing on like patient confidentiality laws and rules regarding that, especially like given the vulnerable nature of your the potential vulnerable nature of your clientele. Right. And like Binging with Babish is like one of their largest, I think, partnerships. Like there were like several videos that promoted it, and a lot of people brought it to Andrew's attention, and it kind of and it caused a whole controversy where eventually Andrew had to respond to it. And I always kind of I guess this is where I'll get into like my personal take on the matters. I always kind of hated the response to it because well, one of the responses was like they kept like the BetterHelp sponsorship, but in the video and this was granted post like the whole controversy with BetterHelp, Andrew was saying like, oh, don't worry guys, the company reassured me that like they don't do that like data brokerage stuff anymore, they don't sell customer data anymore. And it's like, what, like you just took their word for it? Like what are you doing, right? And there was like a similar response to that too, with like a pinned comment where like, oh, I looked into the company and they seem on the up and up. And it's like, well, yeah, of course you would, because they're paying you to look the other way, right? And it was just so messy, and I always hated his response to it, especially because like a part of it kind of leaned on like the thing that like larger content creators do, where they lean on the parasociality of their audience, right? To be like, oh, don't bully me. I'm just a widow content creator, right? And it's like again one of the largest food-based channels on the platform, so it just always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And that wasn't even the first time. I think like later on too, there was a controversy where it was one of Alvin's videos. I remember specifically because I saw the video with and without the sponsorship, because it was like so like the controversy around it was so bad that they had to pull the episode and then re-upload it without like the sponsorship and explain like in a pinned comment again, like, oh yeah, we're sorry for like doing the sponsorship. It was like for I think crypto betting or like crypto investing, something like that. And like the same thing. And I don't know, it always kind of rubs me the wrong way, because Binging with Babish isn't like the only channel to like do this, right? But they are certainly like, I think, the largest target. But like, you ever see a channel that's like big enough and they like immediately take like the seediest, the shadiest sponsorships out there, right? And you're like, and this is coming from like microscopic content creator, right? Like the worst I've tried to peddle to people is like laundry detergent strips that I don't know, may or may not have worked. I don't know. They never gave me a sample of it. But no, like you just think to yourself like, come on, you're like you're like a pretty large creator. You could be more discerning with your sponsors. And I get the defense that like, oh, there's like a large studio, they have to pay people, there's like real money that has to go into it. So you obviously you're more incentivized to take more seedier like sponsorships, but like you're binging with Babish, dude. Like you're so large as a channel that YouTube custom tailors ads specifically for your channel. Like I don't get like podcast pasta related ads with like this episode or whatever. Man, like do better. Come on, man. Um and okay, again, to be fair, they kind of have like there are like other sponsors that I think for the most part are okay. At least as far as I know. Like I don't know, maybe Bombas secretly has like sweatshops in like the New York underground or something. I don't know. But I'm just saying, we could do better. That's all I'm saying. So that's like the big one that I think rightfully gets a lot of flack from people. Another one was, and this one I don't really know too much about because I never used Babish for like to actually teach myself how to cook. Like maybe occasionally I pick up like a tip or two from watching the show, but I never like used it to follow along recipes. But there was also like a whole website controversy where like a lot of free recipes on his like dedicated website were eventually like moved over to like a paid website where you have to pay for recipes, and it was like done with like poor communication. And again, it's like such a similar communication issue where it was like, oh, don't bully me, I'm just a small little million subscriber channel on YouTube, right? Like and it also just kind of like rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, I guess granted not enough to like completely turn me off the channel, right? Because I mean, I don't know if it's just a relative scale thing or whatever, but like death of the author, whatever. But no, I mean, those I think are like the big criticisms that everyone has with the channel. But to get kind of into, I think more of the petty stuff or like more the personal stuff for like me in terms of like presentation style. So this one's going to be kind of weird. So I noticed I noticed a lot with watching Alvin, a lot of Alvin shows is that, again, Alvin's like a pretty good compliment, I think, to Andrew, right? He has a very similar style, but I think he does have like enough presence to keep you at least somewhat interested in like the videos that he produces. But one thing that I've noticed that just drives me nuts is that like in everything that he does, he kind of really emphasizes the fact that none of the food that he's making is going to waste, right? And look, I get it. The sentiment is like nice, right? Like, yes, ideally, if you do like a cooking based channel on YouTube, you should try to minimize food loss. But like, it kind of like in Alvin's case with how often he does it, like every episode he does it. It kind of creates this weird Streisand of like, I don't know if like Streisand effect is the right word, but like I keep, when he does it, I like hyper fixate on it and like think to myself, because realistically, any food operation, and especially like, a cooking channel, eventually you're going to waste food. Again, you should minimize it, but it happens. It happens to like anything involving food. Like even like when you cook at home, sometimes I get chicken from the store that isn't like, that's kind of shady, so you have to throw it out. There's nothing you could do about it, right? Same thing with like fast food and everything like that. And binging with Babish is like, or like the Babish culinary universe is like no exception to that, right? I think there was like, didn't Andrew like waste a whole Parmesan wheel because like mold grew on it? Like, I'm sorry, how isn't that waste, right? And I don't know, it just bugs me. Like, you could do it every so often, but like, I don't know, like, I just don't like how it's like every time. Like, I get it. You're terrified of people calling you out for like wasting food, right? Like, I mean, in contrast, like Andrew doesn't do it that often. Like maybe like every so often he does. Like recently he did like a review or like a ratings for like he was rating like chicken tenders in like from stores, and with like the bird flu and everything, like chicken is like more expensive. So he specifically stated that he didn't waste any of the food, which makes sense. Like for a show like that, you're using a lot of chicken, right? But it's just like, you could just chill, Alvin. You could just. I get it. I will trust you that you don't waste the food, right? Um, so that's one. And again, it's such a minor nitpick that I just have personally. Like you do like this weird drinking game with how often he says none of this food went to waste. Um, and another one that I have is I've noticed it more with like Andrew outside of like the binging with Babish show, and I think part of that is like the main show of the channel. It's like it's shorter, it's more like structured. I think in terms of like a script or whatever, and I think it has like a nice flow, kind of a nice pace to it all. But I noticed that like whenever Andrew has to like play to the camera, and you see this mostly, I think, with like the best of Babish, like series with the best of Babish, the best of Babish show, is that how do I explain this? And look, part of this might be that I might be a little dead inside, maybe. But like when he has to play like off the cuff to the camera, a lot of it is like very quippy, right? Like he does like small little jokes here and there, and it's fine like every now and then. But it's like sometimes I don't know. I don't think Andrew's that like funny. I think he's interesting. I like his insights on like cooking and I think he's has a real talent for like at the very least production, coming up and executing like these very simple ideas for shows. But I think in terms of like an actual personality to play to the camera, it just does not work for me like at all. Like sometimes he does like a quip and I'm like, okay, haha, that's funny, and then it like kind of drags on for a bit, and it feels like I'm trapped in like this micro stand-up special or whatever. And you guys know how hit and miss I am about stand-up comedy, right? But I just feel like I'm just stuck there. I'm just waiting for the next section, and I'm looking at the YouTube runtime. It's like, oh god, there's 46 minutes to this video. No wonder. Like I don't know, I just think that at least for that it could be more condensed. And maybe other people have brought it up too, because I think in like again the chicken tender episode, there was like in like one of the entries he was like kind of doing like a little joke thing, and then he mentioned along the lines of, oh, I'll try and be faster with like going through these. So maybe I don't know, maybe other people complain about it, or maybe it's just a me thing. I don't know. But yeah, it's just, and a part of it could just be like, again, because like he's probably like what, a millennial, right? And for myself, I just hate like I just grown to hate like that type of like quippy, jokey humor. I never really try it in my own stuff because I mean I'm not a comedian. I'm not like known for my humor. I like just talking about ideas or whatever. Um, but yeah, it just bugs me sometimes. I feel like it would be better paced if it was like if you could just cut out those bits. But like again, what do I know? I don't have the million subscriber channel, so And the day he beats me out anytime. I think that's kind of it. I think that's pretty much the main criticisms that I have with again, I don't want to make it sound like I hate the channel. I just think it has kind of had some ups and downs, I think, with its production over the years, and I think it's worth talking about. So what can you do? But oh my god, this is 24 minutes long. But thank you so much for listening, watching, whatever. And as a recommendation for any longtime listeners, I would recommend watching me at 1.25 speed because apparently I sound really good at that speed. Or at least I think so. I don't know. Later.